Good morning. Thank you all for coming. Struggling with our famous metro system. This is an important session about the migrant situation, refugee situation in Europe. I am Boyden Gray. I'm a member of the Atlantic Council's Board of Directors and a member of the new Euro Growth Initiative, which the Atlantic Council has started to try to help reinvigorate growth between the two continents across the Atlantic. And it is headed by Stuart Eisenstadt. Is he here? Just left. And former Commissioner, President of the European Commission, Manuel Barroso, who was President of the Commission when I was in Europe as U.S. Ambassador to the EU. So it was a great pleasure for me to see these two old friends of mine head up this very, very important initiative. A key to all of this, of course, is the current crisis, if you want to call it that. Certainly the difficulty of dealing with these migrants, refugees. One of the key facets of the European project is the free movement of people, goods, services, and capital. And when you impede the free movement of people, you have struck at the heart of what makes Europe Europe. And so it has to get solved. Today's papers are full of stories of the initiation of the new agreement between the EU and Turkey over the relocation of some of these refugees. This is a very important project. It's not without controversy. It is a key to the future of Europe's continued survival. But I really would rather take this opportunity for this session to look at the opportunities inherent in this series of difficulties, not the troubles. There will be a panel discussion where there will be questions where you can go into some of the difficulties, but I would prefer to put the emphasis, as I introduced our first principal speaker, on the opportunities. Just heard a report from UPS representative who's been in Berlin, looking at, talking to many of the people coming through, and seeing really highly talented individuals who are looking for a much better set of opportunities than they have in Syria and in that part of the world. So this is not a situation of people coming in, at least all people coming in, looking for a handout. This is people coming in looking for ways to make Europe a better place for them and for Europeans already there. We are, in this country, of course, struggling with our own immigration issues in this campaign season, but I don't think anybody on either side of the aisle denies the fact that we are a country of immigrants and have benefited enormously from the vibrancy, the new ideas, the strength, and the creativity of our newest citizens from all over the world. And we hope that this can be a help amidst a lot of gloom, that there are many bright lights that may emerge from this. Europe is suffering from depopulation in parts of the Union. This could solve that problem quickly. We would have that problem in this country were it not for our own continued flow of immigrants into the U.S. So the U.S. and the EU have an enormous amount in common. The need to have the two continents connect better on economic growth, because without growth, you won't find the jobs for these people, and without finding jobs for the people, you won't be able to take advantage of them, and there will be a spiral, not down necessarily, but stagnation, which is the worst thing that can happen to any society and any culture. So I'd like to look on the right side myself and hope that this conference this morning will look on the bright side. And I don't want to talk any longer and bore you any longer. I'm going to turn this whole thing over to Antonio Spilimbergo, who is the IMF mission chief to Turkey, who will outline the IMF's new report on the refugee surge in Europe. Very, very important report. I hope you all will pay close attention. Antonio, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here at the Council to talk about this very important topic. Thank you, Ambassador, for the introduction. And this report was written at the IMF following the request of our member countries. As the refugee surge started last summer, our member countries in Europe were concerned about the economic effects of the refugees and asked IMF to write a report on the economic effect, what we know, we don't know about the refugee crisis. One clarification. We are fully aware that the main challenges are political, humanitarian, but we think that it's very important to understand the economic aspects. If anything, to frame the debate on humanitarian political aspects much better than sometimes in the press or in the popular speak you see. So one scope, one goal of the report was also to debunk or to address some myths, some ideas that are popular out there, but they do not have strong support in the data. With this in mind, I will focus on two aspects. First, the basic data. Second, on 4 economic issues. I will talk about the facts. I skip the part of the institutional framework which has changed, and I think later in the debate we'll talk more. And I will focus on 4 economic aspects: labor market, fiscal effects, growth, and age-related spending, and the implication of refugees on the long-term aging in Europe. Let's start with the facts. Well, we are talking about a refugee crisis or refugee surge in Europe, but refugees are a worldwide phenomenon. There are over 14 million refugees in Europe, in the world. And this number has increased over time mostly because of the conflict in Middle East, in Syria, but also in Afghanistan, in the region. In Europe, there was a dramatic increase in refugees in year 2015, and for the year, that is actually, I realize that is not correct. Through December 2015, the inflow was over 1.2 million of first-time refugees. Here there are some confusion on the numbers. These are the official number reported from Eurostat. There is some confusion because some refugees register in several places, and so we prefer to take just the official number. What do we expect about the refugee in the future? Well, there are about 8 million displaced people within Syria, out of a population of 24 million before the war. So about 1/3 of the population of Syria is displaced within Syria. These are potential refugees. These are people who have not left their country. They hope to come back, but they are already displaced within the country. Of this, in addition, there are 4 million that have already left Syria. 2.5 are in Turkey, and another 2 million are in the regions, including in Lebanon, Jordan. These ongoing conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Eritrea suggest that the number of refugees could increase more this year when the good season starts and is easier to move. Moreover, we know from previous literature that network network effects are very important in the refugee migration and in migrant in general. Once you have a well-established community, it's easier to move. So we do expect some more migration in the future, both because of the number of displaced people has increased and because we have these refugees. Of course, there are policies that have changed a lot, and about this we'll talk a little bit later. Just to have an idea of the number, Europe is not new to the refugee. You have three big waves of refugee in Europe. You have, at the beginning of the 90s, at the end of the Cold War, when you have a wave of refugees from former communist countries. You have a wave of refugee in the late 90s, following the war in the former Yugoslavia. And now you have a new wave. What is characteristic of new wave are two things. First, that is much bigger than the peak than the rest. 2015 is already twice as much as the previous peak, which was reached in 92. Second is the origin of this country, which is not within Europe. They are not, for instance, in some of the way at the end of Cold War, were ethnic German coming back home, and this new wave of refugee is very different from ethnically and religiously from the previous waves. This is it's important to keep in mind also for political consideration. Second, you see this picture illustrates the evolution over the last few months of refugees. The blue line shows the refugees in 2013 by month, the green line in 2014, and as you can see, starting in late spring 2015, there was a huge increase in the refugee, which peaked during the summer. It went back in December. It's difficult at this stage to say whether this is because of policies or because of the weather, because this seasonal pattern is common also, was common in the past. So it's very crucial to see what happens in the next few months. We have preliminary data for January and February. I say preliminary because few countries didn't report yet, but they are still somewhat higher than they were in 2015. But this is, I think the jury is still out to see whether the recent agreement between EU and Turkey will work on limiting the number of refugees. The key numbers will come out in the next few months. Apart from this surgery, what is very important is also the destination of this. The panel on the left shows that the main destination are Germany. The absolute number for Germany was staggering. These are just the official, so it's much less of the number you see sometimes in the press, because these are already certified with the Eurostat. And after there is Hungary. Hungary has a big number, but because they insist in registering everybody, but we know that afterwards it was just a transit country. And the third is Sweden and Austria, which are very important. So de facto, the refugee surge affects mostly as a destination three countries: Germany, Austria, and Sweden. These are the three countries which are mostly affected. France, Spain are very marginally touched, and you have some important transit countries, including Greece and Italy. But most of the refugee final destination is Germany and Austria and Sweden. Another thing, as I mentioned before, the provenance is very important. As you see, there was a big increase of refugees from Syria, the doubling. But what is a little bit puzzling, at least was puzzling to us at the beginning, was to discover that the refugees from other countries are increasing very rapidly, from Kosovo in particular, which is a little bit strange because there was not a civil war or something. So this speaks to the fact that there was some a kind of, once you start to open some doors, you have some additional migration from other countries which are not directly affected. And also from Afghanistan. Basically, a route opened, so people started to move using this new path. Well, let's go. Well, now I go to the economics. I deal with three basic questions. First, labor market. fiscal growth and aging. Labor market, two aspects. How do immigrants or refugees integrate? This wave is too recent to say something. We have to look back at what happened at previous immigrants. To do this, we have two ways. We have our own statistics, but we also rely on meta-studies. We look at the previous studies on refugees, and we ask the question, what is the gap in wages, average gap in wage of refugee? So we have a large number of studies, I think more than 20s, 30s, and this picture shows that, for instance, in 19 studies, refugees or migrants, sorry, have a 30% wage gap. So controlling for their characteristic, education, gender, age, the average migrant has 30% less than a native. This is across studies for the US and Europe, so it doesn't distinguish. Few studies found that on average there is no difference. But on average, you see that most studies found that there is a gap between 20 and 40%. So there is a consensus in the labor literature that migrants on average earn 30% less than natives. I stress again, given the same characteristic. So integration of immigrants for a series of reasons is difficult. Could be because of the language, because of recognition of education, titles, and so on, but is difficult. This is something that emerges from several countries, several studies, several methodologies. Our own statistics show exactly the same pattern. Of course, this is at impact. So the first year, they earn 30% less. As time follows, there is much less. But even the second generation earns somewhat less than natives. So this also should be kept in mind. This gap goes down, but doesn't disappear easily. Unless, well, I'll talk later about policy. So the second question on the labor market is, what is the impact of migrants on natives? In other words, do migrants steal jobs from native? This is a question that politicians are it's very important for politicians and for analysts. Well, the answer is quite is simple. There is very little evidence that migrants or refugees steal labor from natives. And there are several studies. There are some effects, but they are very short-lived and very small, and for very peculiar group. Labor economists have studied extensively big episodes of migration. For instance, the Marilito boat in the 80s, when I think 100,000 Cubans moved to Miami labor market overnight. There was very little effect. You have a similar study in Portugal, when Portugal lost the colonies in 75. A lot of people repatriated, over 1 million repatriated to Portugal. And you don't see much of an effect. You have a similar effect also in Israel in 1994, when a lot of Russian Jews moved back to Israel, and there was not much an effect. So both case studies and other surveys show that there is not a big effect of the refugee, on migrants, on local labor market for natives. There are some, but not so much. So the literature has moved a little bit. Why this is the case? Why we don't see much of an effect? Well, this could be, sometimes I think that one explanation is that the migrants have skills which are complementary with the natives, and so they don't compete for the same job, but help producing the same enhancing economic activity, or there is a change in product mix. A very good example is the textile industry in Southern California. Didn't exist before. Many 100 years ago, when the Mexicans started to come, there was cheap labor, and you could have a textile industry in California. Another example is the high-tech industry in Israel was not very important before 92, 93. After an infusion of many Russian-trained engineers, you had the high-tech miracle in Israel. So there is both an effect of complementarity and migrants simply invented new opportunities when they reach. But the bottom line is that there is no strong evidence of competition. There is some little qualification, actually, because the current wave of migrants from Syria to Turkey, about 2.5 million people out of a population of about 78 million people, it seems that in the rural areas have some effect competing for women in the work in the rural sector. This is understandable because the numbers are so huge and basically the qualifications are not very high, so there is some possibility. But if previous studies are right, you'd show over time some complementarity more than competition. Another important mechanism that I didn't mention is that there is evidence also of an upgrade. As migrants come, natives tend to upgrade, study more, having more education. And so this also could be a mechanism through which it's easier to integrate migrants. So much for the labor market. Just to summarize, there is a big effect and a gap for migrants, for natives, and migrants, yes. So they earn less, and this is constant across many studies. But on natives, you have very little effect. What about the fiscal cost? Here, the bottom line, there is a study done by OECD on previous migrations. What we did is just to gather some numbers from our member countries. We ask and we check what they plan, what they budget for the refugees. These are the numbers, the share of GDP. The bottom line of this picture is that quite not much so far. On average is 0.2% of GDP, and the country which by far spends more on refugee is Sweden with 1%. But even countries like Germany with a large quota of refugee, for the moment spend about 1/3 of a point of GDP, 0.35%, which is relatively modest. This table is, the numbers of this table are very complicated because different countries put very different things on this table. I know Hungary put the cost of building the wall. Other countries, so while Sweden put the money for integrating or to integrate migrants. So these numbers have to be taken with a lot of grain of salt. But the bottom line, which is clear, is that the numbers are not huge. So the idea that migrants cause a big fiscal problem is not there, is not evident from the number. This table also shows that the importance of building a common methodology to account for migrants, for fiscal expenditure on migrants. Because right now we cannot really compare these numbers. As I said, Hungary put something that Sweden put something else. So it's very, in the future, I think some work should be done to have a common number on this. The other issue is that this is just a picture. But to have a proper idea, we should have a movie. Because as we know from fiscal studies, at the beginning of life, people get more because they are education, they enjoy education. Later on, they work and they contribute fiscally and so on. So given that the migrant population is relatively young, this doesn't account from the fact that now Europe is spending more on them, but in the future, if integrated, they will give it back. These intertemporal studies are very important, but are not here yet. As I said, the OECD has done something, and I think that is an area where we should do more. Yes, very quickly. We have done some estimation of what happens with to GDP growth on uses some assumption, more or less integration on. As you can see, well, these are very let's say, hypotheses are not written in stone, and so are very, it's a rule of thumb. But there is a positive effect on GDP growth for all countries. In the short run, it's purely due to the demand effect. Spending more, you have more aggregate demand, so GDP goes up. But in the longer term, you have a supply effect, because as these people are integrated into the labor market, they contribute to growth in the future.
But what is the EU?
The EU is Germany. So Germany is that, and we have two scenarios. I don't go into detail for the sake of time, but we have a scenario with more integration, less integration, and we look at unemployment, fiscal, and refugees, and output. But let me go quickly to the last topic, is on migration and population growth. This graph shows the population change in the EU 28. It shows the natural change, the blue line. So it tells that, for instance, in 1960, Europe increased by about 3.5 million per year. And you see the natural change, what is purely due to the native population, declines over time. Starting in the mid-90s, the natural increase in population is zero overall. It's basically zero. It's very minimal. It's less than 500,000. But the green light shows the contribution due to migration. And as you can see, starting in the mid-80s, the contribution is positive, and now is the main part of the growth of population in Europe is due to immigration. This speaks to the fact that long-term effects are important for all aging dynamics. We have done some simulation, and using the, again, the numbers here should be taken really carefully, and these are our results, but refugees are younger on average than average citizens, and pension expenditure will be lower by about 1/4 of GDP in 2030. Here we are very conservative on the amount, very, very conservative. Simply because we don't want to give the idea that you can solve the pension system just by inflow of refugees. The central message here is that for systems that need some reform, you have to do the reforms anyway. Refugees can help in the transition phase, but they cannot address the big problem. There was this naive view that you just have a lot of refugees and everything will be solved. It's not there. Finally, summary. So just to summarize, and in the reports we do elaborate much more. The flow of displaced people are large by historical standard, and may persist because a lot of people are displaced in Syria and around. The international experience is that the impact on native workers is very limited and confined to some groups. At the same time, it shows that refugees and immigrants in general usually have a big wage gap. In the report, we do elaborate some set of policies that can help this to close this gap. Many countries have experience. I have some experience with active labor market policies. These were key, and I have shown to have worked very well in the past for some countries. And so I think part of the message of the report is that extrapolating from the experience in Sweden, Germany, you can really integrate much better these people. Faster labor market integration lowers cost and raises gains. So this should be seen as an investment. This active labor market cost have some fiscal cost, but in the medium term, they really have high return. And in the report, we elaborate on this. And at the end, yes, fiscal costs are quite limited, so are not. There is a discussion about how these fiscal costs can be accommodated within the Growth and Stability Pact, which is a concern for Europe. And we think that there is no need to change this, and there is sufficient room within the framework. So that's all. So,
That's really great.
Okay, hello from me too. Good morning. I'm Katerina Soku. I'm the Washington correspondent for Kathimerini Greek Daily and Sky TV. And if I may please call to the podium, Antonio, to begin with. Thank you. And Moreno Bertoldi. He is the principal advisor to the EU delegation in the United States, a career in the European Commission. He came from Brussels, where he served as head of the Directorate General for Economic and Financial Affairs. This is the European Treasury, if I may call it like that, yeah, or the Ministry of the Economy. And he has also been the counselor for the European Commission delegation in Japan, and was head of the unit responsible for the G20 countries and groups, as well as the IMF at the European Commission's Directorate, again, the Treasury Ministry. And may I please welcome Laura Lane as well. She's the President of Global Public Affairs at United Parcel Service. Previously, she was Managing Director, Head of International Government Affairs for Citigroup, Vice President for Global Policy, Public Policy at Time Warner. While in the 90s, Laura served in the US Foreign Service, including postings to Colombia and Rwanda. She has an inspiring story from Rwanda that maybe you could share later with us. But she was Watch Officer under Secretary of State Warren Christopher and served at the Trade Policy and Programs Office in the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs at the State Department as a representative on the US Basic Telecommunications Negotiating Team and negotiator in the World Trade Organization Financial Services Negotiation, which was the first one that was ever brokered, made. So inspiring people to talk about this issue with us. And if I may start with Antonio and his presentation and ask, is there, I understand that some of your examples that you use in order to project what will happen in the future are previous cases of migration. Now we actually have a different surge of mostly refugees who are fleeing war and conflict. And I was wondering how that may affect the results, the economic impact in the future. Would these people go back after some time, and would that affect the economics of the problem?
Yeah. Previous studies have shown that actually the integration of refugees is more difficult. First, because it's natural. Economic migrants have a selection. They go because there is work, they want to work there, but migrants leave the country because of the situation of the home country is difficult. Said that the gap is bigger. We have shown, and we have a graph in our studies on this, but you observe the same time profile. Over time, there is an absorption, there is a reduce, this gap reduces over time. Mm-hmm. The other issue is that if they are allowed to work or not. Some countries, including Turkey, didn't allow refugees to work until very recently. So you have 2.5 million people who legally couldn't work. And this is terrible. This is terrible because studies have shown that if you oblige people to stay out of work for 3, 4 years, they simply lose their ability, not only their hope. And so one big message is shorten the period when they cannot work. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's bad for refugees, it's bad for the host countries. Mm-hmm.
So I guess that brings me to Moreno and the European Union policy on how to accept and how many refugees to accept and how to integrate them. we've seen in the press, and I think the current affairs is full of stories about how these people are being received in the countries of first entry, the challenges there, of documenting them, of hosting them. Now the borders are closed, so they cannot really move from Greece to other countries. So there is a challenge of how to receive them to begin with, let alone integrate them. So I was wondering what your take would be on what the European Union is doing right now to address this challenge.
Well, I mean, measures have been taken recently in the middle of March, and we are now putting them in place. So the first thing is to break the networks, illegal networks of people smugglers that have been operating and that have managed a lot of these flows, and in the meantime to continue to let refugees come in, but to have them properly registered and distributed inside the European Union. And in that we have taken measures and there have been pledges. So I mean, for instance, we are strengthening the presence of European officials in charge of the external borders that work together with the Greek and Italian authorities to have these people registered. So there have been pledges. I mean, we have asked for, in the specific case, to have 50 readmission experts added to the people who are already working, and already 44 have been allocated. The escort officers that have to take care of the people who arrive and help them to provide the first help and bring them in the various hotspots where they will be registered. There have been, the request is that we need 1,500, 700 are already being received, and the others will come soon. We need judges in order to be able to assess each case individually, because I mean, now there will be people who will be sent back to Turkey if they don't have the requisite to be refugees, but will not be done in a wholesale manner. Will be done one by one. All people will be interviewed. Some, many will be accepted. Some will be asked to go back. Some may even go back, but they can appeal, and their appeal will be considered, and therefore even if Turkey and the appeal disagreed, they will be readmitted. So we are putting that. I mean, we needed 30 judges. We have already received 33, so we are even above what we had asked for. So we are building the infrastructure to allow these people to come, to be registered, and to be allocated in an orderly way in the European Union. The orderly way is very important for two reasons. One is because, as we have seen at the end, as we have seen last year, the massive inflow in certain time. I mean, it's not that, I mean, the number of inflow is not manageable in an area that has more than 500 million people, but if all people come through one or two spots, Lampedusa, Lesbos, and after they go through the same route and so on, I mean, that creates a sense of difficult and the idea that the authorities are not able to manage, and after you have people sleeping outside, living in the street and so on, and that is amplified also by the media and creates a sort of political backlash. While if you have orderly, then it can be managed much more easily, and that is what we are doing. That is also what is the basis of the agreement with Turkey.
And Laura just came back from an organized, I understand, and refugee camp in Germany, where you were telling us earlier how stunned you were with the skill and the talent of the people you saw there, mostly Syrian refugees. What is the business perspective on the refugee surge? And I understand that your company, UPS, is doing a lot in trying to help from the business perspective, from the private perspective, work with the public and with the refugees in order to integrate them?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I was going to say, I mean, from the UPS perspective, this isn't a European problem. This is a problem that all of us should be working in partnership to address. The solution isn't only going to come from governments. It's going to come from a three-part solution that is the partnership between governments, businesses, and civil society, trying to find ways to address the challenges and make those challenges opportunities. So specific to that, UPS has taken on the issue of the refugee crisis in a very personal way. We operate in 220 countries and territories. We have 435,000 employees. And you know what? We operate in a lot of places, and anytime there's natural disaster or there's a crisis, we take it personal because it becomes local for us. Anything that threatens the security or the stability of the communities we serve, we should be part of the solution to reestablish that stability, because that's good for business, right? From that perspective, UPS has said, you know what? We've got a lot of logistics capabilities. We have a lot of talented UPSers who not only know how to run logistic networks, but they're also great lawyers. They're great builders. They're great engineers. And so we've asked them across our company to come together to help address the refugee crisis. So what has that meant? We have used our network to coordinate with the NGOs to bring all of the donations that come together and get them to the places that need them. You get a lot of donations from a lot of places, but you need to get them to where they're going to make a difference. UPS uses the power of our logistics network to get those donations to where they're needed. We use our people to volunteer day in and day out to help in any ways that they can. We have a commitment in our company to do 20 million hours of volunteer service by 2020. We don't have to ask our people. They automatically go out and do it. They're working in these centers on the weekends, helping to teach German in the case of the Berlin Center, because if these people are going to be integrated into the country, they have to speak the local language so that they can communicate. We're working with these centers to help them organize their logistics capabilities to develop better warehousing capabilities so that you know, hey, we're running low on socks. Let's figure out how we can organize an effort to get more socks into that center. Real story. I went to the Berlin Center, and you know what? Everybody donates the jackets and the pants and everything that you naturally think of. Nobody thinks of socks. And you know what I told my team? I told my team, think about what it's like for those families that are walking, that are cold, their feet are wet. What's the nicest thing you can do? Give them a warm pair of socks. We delivered on my last trip. I brought them in my suitcases, 487 pairs of socks that we collected in 1 week. And you know what? You thought I was bringing gold to some of these people, because just to get a clean pair of socks made all the difference. I brought lollipops too. And you know what? The kids loved the lollipops, but so did the moms and dads that were there to say, wow, thank you for caring. And that's, I guess, the fundamental point. There's a lot of opportunities for business to use our big project management skills, our know-how, our very talented people who, if you ask them to devote a little bit of themselves to help make the situation better for people in the communities where they're living and working, you can make a world of difference. Mm-hmm. And on the second part about the very good presentation given about the economic opportunities, UPS is a company where our CEO started as a preloader and a driver. He was trained by our company to do the basics of our operations, the very important parts of our operations. He's now the CEO 41 years later. You know what I know? I know UPS has the ability to train people at the very entry level. We can teach them to be preloaders. They taught me how to be a UPS driver, and I drove for 2 months, so clearly we have the training capabilities. A lot of these refugees, give them an opportunity to support themselves and their families, and we've done them a world of good. And in the center that I was at, there's a lot, the families that were there, they want an opportunity to rebuild their lives, but they need help getting those work permits. And it's been taking 6 to 9 months just to get through the bureaucratic red tape. UPS would be ready to hire many of those folks in our preload and our sort, in our Cologne operations right now, if we could get the proper paperwork to be able to give them an opportunity to be part of our organization. But it's not just UPS. There's lots of other companies that can be doing this. So we need a three-part partnership. government, working with business, working with civil society, and together, this doesn't have to be a problem. It can be a great economic opportunity, and it's the right thing to do.
For sure. It's a humanitarian issue first and foremost, and then we start from there. You mentioned, I would like to, the public-private partnership, and I would like to link it a bit to the fiscal cost of the refugee surge, because I understand that while the fiscal costs that governments appear in their budget are still small, the reallocation of resources that is needed on an international level and even on a regional level from private individuals, from businesses to help the refugees are much larger, I would imagine, than the numbers that we just saw on how much the budgets are catering to for the refugee crisis. So I was wondering, Antonio, if you have any specific way to calculate that and how you would address the reallocation of resources that is needed in order to address this crisis, which is quite unique, actually, in size.
We do not have an explicit estimation of the private contribution. Turkey has tried to do this, and the number they came up is $7.6 billion, including a lot of things. But there is no way to verify this. This includes a lot of NGO, private donations, and it's very difficult to verify. There is no way to. But let me stress also that there are many actions that the governments can take which have no fiscal cost but of great importance for the integration of refugees, including a key path for migrants is self-employment. In many European countries, it's very difficult to become self-employed because of regulations and other norms. Even here, for instance, just a casual observation, if you drive a cab, it's good probability that it's not it's an immigrant. In Europe, it's very difficult to find, in many countries, immigrants as a cab driver. So there are many, or recognition of titles. It's very important. For instance, we know that story of nurses, doctors that cannot work legally because of recognition of title. That is fiscally doesn't have a big implication, but has a big impact for the integration. So I think it's very important also to stress some actions that can beyond fiscal.
Moreno, can the European Union do anything in that regard in order to push forward with a better integration of refugees in all countries, like a directive or something that would facilitate their integration? For example, like ask all its member states to provide work permits to the refugees while they're waiting for asylum, maybe.
Well, what we can do is moral suasion and discussing, because I mean these are competencies that mostly are with the member states, and we have to take into account that, and we also have to be very careful in order to avoid political backlashes in that respect. I mean, for instance, I mean, President Juncker has been very clear. He said that he's in favor that while the refugee status is processed, people should be allowed to enter the labor market and therefore not to lose the skills and the abilities that. But the things vary among member states. Sometimes some take very few weeks, 1 month, some have 3 months, some they have 6 months, and it's really up to them, and you cannot impose something from the outside. I think that there is, however, the growing awareness that, I mean, in order to have a successful integration of refugees, you need to have them entering more rapidly in the labor market, and that has to be done at all the level of the so in terms of what the European Union is doing is the reallocating resources, financial resources to refugees. I mean, the President Juncker has asked and obtained the doubling resources to help that.
Bureaucratically, was that easy to do? I mean, did you have a lot of backlash when we were trying to reallocate resources? Or?
No, because I think that there was the awareness that we were facing a major challenge for the European Union, and that, I mean, has not been. But I mean, clearly since you are allocating, you are taking money away from other projects that you have. So I mean, but that was not the major issue, and I think that the people have realized, and I mean that you have to intervene. And I think that what you see is that more and more the member states and also the local authorities are doing things in order to allow and facilitate the integration of refugees in the respective country, knowing that for some countries the challenge is higher. I mean, even countries that, for instance, have an aging population maybe at this moment are facing also high unemployment rates, and therefore even if what Antonio said, that I mean, in reality the refugees don't take work away from the native population, the perception sometimes is different, and so we have to work on this perception, and there is really there for the political leaders to make a big, spend a lot of political capital, because we are seeing that there's been, however, a reaction to the inflow of refugees, and often has not been very positive. And therefore, you need to explain, explain that the fiscal costs are not so high, because, I mean, people see, I mean, they say, I mean, we have, in the case of Italy, 300,000 people entering last year through the borders. I mean, is this, I mean, people think that the cost is very high. Instead, I mean, as Antonio showed, was 0.25% of GDP. So, I mean, all these things have to be explained, and to be explained carefully. And on that, you have to make a big effort. I think as the European Union, this has been on the top of our agenda and our discussions since a couple of months, and we are making the effort, but everybody has to do the same.
And Laura, if you may tap into your experience at the State Department as a U.S. diplomat, and how do you see, obviously the U.S. government is the biggest donor at the UN and on the refugee issue, but how would you suggest, how would you recommend to the U.S. government to tackle this crisis? A lot of people have focused on the fact that 10,000, and a contested number for that is too low of a contribution for the U.S. government to be accepting only 10,000 Syrian refugees, given the crisis faced and the numbers that we saw, the millions of people that are displaced. How would you address it? And if it is, I don't know if this is a good opportunity to go back into your Rwandan experience as well, too.
Yeah. The Rwandan experience, sadly, wasn't an example of the U.S. government or the international community rising to the cause and addressing what was a devastating time in world history. But I can't speak for the U.S. government because I'm not in the U.S. government, but I would say that the Obama administration has had some pretty amazing initiatives where they've asked companies to come together to be leaders among the business community in partnership with government. I think about our Hiring Vets initiative, where President Obama asked a handful of companies to come together and say, what can we do to provide employment for our vets? They've asked a handful of companies to come together and say, let's be leaders in the industry in support of our climate change initiatives. In both cases, UPS was there. What can the U.S. do? The U.S. government, I think, could have that convening power of bringing NGOs and businesses together to find ways to fill that gap of need and opportunity and bring those ideas in that kind of roundtable setting. I think about every natural disaster that occurs, and UPS is at the center of a lot of those roundtables where we get organizations from Catholic Relief Services to CARE to the Red Cross all around a table, and everyone says, okay, here's what I've got. I've got 10,000 blankets. I've got 15,000 first aid kits. How do we get them to X location to help? And it's a constant dialogue of needs and opportunities for companies to help meet those needs. That kind of roundtable or convening of capabilities and skills, I think would be very valuable to addressing those needs. In terms of taking on additional people into the country, the US government has a good process that should continue to be used for people applying for asylum to be adjudicated by US law and given the opportunity to come to the United States. We don't have a system of quotas, to my knowledge, with respect to asylum. I'd hope that process has continued to be used. That said, many of the people that I met, for example, in the Berlin Center, they just want opportunity, and it's not necessarily where, but it's the opportunity. So anything that the U.S. government can do to facilitate that opportunity, anything we can do to drive economic growth, particularly in Europe, I think would help then ease that burden, because then folks wouldn't see it as a cost. As the economy is growing, there's more opportunities for others to be brought in. In that regard, UPS is putting its money where its mouth is. We're investing $2 billion in Europe. We believe in what Europe can become with the infusion of more investment. And to that point that you made, it was an excellent point. Europe needs to find ways to become even more pro-business. From that respect, UPS is a big believer in the internal market. We need to make sure that borders don't get put back up between countries, because when those borders get put back up, it ruins the economic opportunities, I think, that come from that integration.
And affect the internal market as well.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of ways that the U.S. government can help keep the asylum process going. Don't shut that down. It's in U.S. law. Give people an opportunity to come here to the United States. 2, convene those that have the ability to help make a difference. Don't assume that governments are the only ones that can solve this problem. Have that convening power and regular dialogue. And 3rd, promote economic growth with the right policies. UPS is going to invest. We're going to be part of the solution. Let's find other ways to create more growth in Europe, because then there's a lot more opportunity to go around.
Perfect. Well, I have more questions, but this is the time to take a few questions of the audience. And if I may start with the gentleman here.
Thank you very much. Thomas Lambert, I'm DCM at the Belgian Embassy. And I'm very inspired by the data that I saw here. So 1, they're not stealing jobs. 2, they're very complementary. And 3, also, I'm very happy to note that there's a true commitment of the private sector. And UPS is a big investor also in Belgium, both for national and European operations, I imagine.
Our headquarters is in Belgium.
Yes. But my question is a more straightforward one. We hear many stories that contradict themselves on the economic profiles of these people. Some say they can barely read or write. Others say, no, we find engineers and doctors, you name it, lawyers. But what, and maybe that's a specific question for you, what is the economic profile of these people? Do you see a pattern emerge? Are these people mostly higher skilled, lower skilled? Do you detect a pattern?
Yeah. I actually think it's a mix. And from that perspective, those that have incredible skills, for example, I met one gentleman who was a structural engineer fleeing Syria with his family. And I was thinking, wow, this guy's got skills that could easily be employed in terms of, building another one of our facilities that we're building across Europe. Then I also met, a family that they weren't they were coming from a background where I didn't get the sense that they'd had a college education or anything like that, but they were earnest in their view that they didn't want to have their kids grow up in war-torn Syria, and they literally strapped the kids on their back and went all the way to make it to Germany. And from that perspective, I'm really proud to work at UPS because we have opportunities for people of all ranges of skills and capabilities. And I'm not just saying it in terms, I can give specific examples. We have great partnerships in the state of Kentucky and the state of Chicago, in the state of Illinois, particularly in the Chicagoland area, where there was challenges for the governors in terms of finding employment for young people coming out of very poor economic environments, no chance that they'd ever finish high school, much less go to college. And UPS set up programs so that they could work in our operations by night and get their GED or their college degree by day. I think there's a lot of very innovative programs. So even those that can't read or write, we have operations that don't require reading or writing. They require learning certain skills, and you can train them to do certain activities. Similarly, I think about the amazing programs that Germany has in terms of apprenticeships and vocational training. I'm a true believer in if you've got the will within a person, you can teach them almost anything. It just takes that time and energy. Teaching them to read and write, that's that's something that it just takes some volunteer hours, and UPSers are committed to doing that. I'll teach you to read and write, and then you can go try to make something more of yourself with that basic skill.
I think, Antonio, we were discussing about this earlier, and we said that there's still more work to be done to actually tap this latest wave of refugees and what the socioeconomic
I think there are two
is.
different aspects. One is the level of education, the degree they have, and the second is the transferability, and this is key. And we have very good example in the past. There are many studies on the Russian engineers moving to Israel in 92, 91, 92, 93. At the beginning, they were janitors. They were very, very simple jobs. In few years, as their skills were recognized, as they benefited from integration program, they integrated very, very well. So the lessons we learn from past experiences is that not only the absolute level of education is important, it's important also more to ensure transferability, which has a legal aspect, but has also an educational aspect. And Sweden, this has done quite a bit. They have a program tailored, and every refugee or immigrant is different, and they try to understand what are the skills and how, crucially, they are transferable. And I think that there is a lot to be learned from Israel and Sweden on this.
The gentleman, please.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my question. My name is Walter Jurasek. Once in my life, in young age, I was a refugee. I don't know if anybody in this room is a refugee. It's a rough life. I escaped the communist country, Poland, and traveled through Vienna, finally to Italy. I did not expect anything from anybody, from no government help, nothing. I risk. Then thanks to the Italian government later on, they put me to the Latin, which is Mussolini camp. Another rough life. There's a problem with this European Union right now to dealing with refugees. Number one, there is a huge cultural clash. We cannot escape. If we don't learn how to deal with that, we never can solve the problem. When I came to US, I was vetted in US Embassy. They asked me one question: have you belonged to the communist country? This is a very good question. If you were a communist country, you couldn't come to US. When I come to US, they thought that I am communist already. They put me on the hotel, 7 days, goodbye, you're on. I didn't come to the government, I didn't come handouts. The problem with refugees, today refugees, And I see that across because I travel all over the world since I came to this country from nothing. I made myself very well. But nobody teach me English. I learn in streets, even in the homeless, in the subway. But the problem with this, when the government put hands out and they put all the time, those people never have any incentives. Those people will not have even courage to do their own. And European Union have a problem with that.
So I guess the question would
The question is what we're going to do to teach the new refugees, if you come to the country, assimilate yourself, learn the language, and accept the culture. Do not change another cultures, because that is a clash, which will be very difficult to solve. So
is it
this is the
to
question. When you're going to think about that, not only
Moreno, would
economic.
you like to take this?
Well, I mean, as Antonio was saying, this inflow is different for various reasons. One is the size, that as we have seen has been even bigger than it was after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The second thing that is different is that the people who are coming have a limited knowledge of Europe, and they come from a different continent and with different customs, religions, and so on. So there is a communitarian issue that exists. And the third one is that there is also the issue of security, because in the past, although the two things should not be assimilated, but there is a fear, in particular in the native population, that among the refugees there could be potential terrorists. And therefore all the three things are creating a situation that makes, in the short term, the problem of integration more difficult, and would be a mistake not to recognize it. So what we are doing, I think that there is an effort that is ongoing. One is to explain to the people who are coming, and I've seen that the German government, the Austrian government, the Italian government, and local authorities, that is even more important, are make an effort to explain not only in German, Italian, and so on, but also in the language of the people who are coming, Syrian and Arabic, what are the customs and what are the proper way to behave in the countries that you are introduced. The other thing is to have the possibility of speaking and integrating with people, and I think that on here UPS has a very good experience in the thing, so that we have not to take as given that the people will come and we will not change their behavior, as well as we have not to take as given that the native people will not adjust their view on these people that initially can be perceived as a threat. The way in which you are able to integrate, you have to have these people integrated in schools, to have education and to learn the language. It requires time, it's difficult, it's politically costly. In the short term you have backlashes, but I think this is the only way, because what is the alternative? The alternative is to say no to refugees, and the EU will lose its soul. We started, in fact, after World War II. The amount of refugees was huge at the time. In economic situation was much more difficult. So we are based on that. There have been studies on that and the reports on that. So we cannot renounce on that. And the alternative, what it is that we fail and we put the refugees aside. We don't integrate them, which means that you have more social expenditure, social welfare expenditure. The positive impact that we are seeing in the long term on pensions would be lost, because these people would not contribute. And you would have, last but not least, the fact that it would be to put a huge strain on the, let's say, free movement of people in Europe, and therefore you would have the risk of Schengen collapsing.
Yes.
And the cost of non-Schengens are also very high. So I mean, in the end, we don't have really a different option that integrate them successfully. And on that, as I said, we have to spend political capital. We have to explain. I think that on their side, there is also willingness, escaping from a war zone, to integrate. And on our side, we have to put the necessary resources, but not only resources, but work at all levels, on the private and private, public and private, to have them integrate in a successful way.
Can I share an example, or are we going to do another question?
We do have another question, and
We will.
Yeah, okay, please, Lauren.
You raised such a fundamental point about that clash of culture. When I was in my government career at the U.S. Trade Representative's office, I actually was the representative that managed a lot of our interactions with the Middle East, and actually started the negotiations with the Royal Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, a country where there is tremendous respect for women specifically. I want to give you a specific example from the Berlin Center visit. And it was astounding to me how the simple act of providing compassion to these refugees is changing some of their cultural views. When many of the young boys, because a lot of the 14 to 18-year-olds are being sent by their families ahead to flee from being recruited to be a part of ISIS or any of the armed groups there, the boys initially would spit on the women volunteers. They would be incredibly disrespectful to all of the women in the center, because culturally they hadn't been raised to see women as equals with men. The male volunteers made sure that they continued to model the right behavior in terms of seeing the women as their partners and their equals in their centers. Most of the volunteers told me it took about 3 months before all of a sudden those young boys started treating those women with a lot more respect. And it was astounding to me. For example, when I visited the center, I did not expect the men to look me in the face. I didn't expect them to shake my hand. But you know what? They did, because they recognized that this is a culture that values men and women equally and sees that we both have contributions to make, and they started seeing that difference. I think the best thing we can do is model our cultural values of non-discrimination and respect. Second point you made was fundamental. That language equation is critical. If we don't create those bridges, not walls, for communicating with each other, to understand each other better, and I think it comes teaching them German if they're living in Germany, teaching them Italian if they're living in Italy, teaching them English if they're in the United States of America. My grandma came over on the boat through Ellis Island, and she made sure she learned English. She was proud of her Italian heritage, but she assimilated here. We need to have those kinds of programs that facilitate that integration and hopefully shape the values on which we want a global community based. And I'm not saying anything disparaging about certain Middle Eastern cultures and how they treat women, but for me, I'd love to see a lot more of that Jordan perspective about how women and men are equal, and that can come through that demonstration effect, which I saw at the centers. And last is give them economic opportunity. You're absolutely right, because many of the people I met, they don't want a handout. They have their dignity and their pride, but we have to help them be able to contribute. We do need to be vigilant, though, because there are bad guys in all of these camps that take advantage of these situations. They prey on people's hopes and fears, not only within the camps, but in the communities around them. We have to work together to strengthen our security apparatus so that we can track the bad guys, but help the good guys.
Mm-hmm. So we really have 3 Italians in the panel today.
Yeah, good Italian. Yeah, that's
and
right.
let's go to another.
That's the passion in the hands, right?
American. John Giese is the correspondent, journalist with Newsmax,
Yes.
and White House correspondent.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I don't have to introduce myself. Thanks very much. It has just been announced that the Pope will make an official visit to Greece April 15th. And at that point, it is almost a foregone conclusion he will address the refugee situation, possibly even meet with refugees while he's there, given his past pattern, and his pronouncements on this in the United States. What good can come on the refugee situation from the Pope's visit, and can the Vatican play a greater role in facilitating some of the noble goals that all three of the panelists have spelled out?
Who do you address the question to?
All three of
All
the
three.
panelists,
Well,
yeah.
Whoever wants to.
I was going to say,
start.
I am a good Catholic, and I am so proud of what Pope Francis is doing. And you know what good can come from it is his fundamental message about compassion, because it's compassion that will defeat a lot of the evil that's driving a lot of these terrorist organizations. And he is someone who has said, my fellow Muslim is not my enemy. Christians and Muslims should be able to find a way to live together in this world. We're all under one God on a certain level, just different ways in practicing our faith. And I know Pope Francis is a vocal advocate for that compassion, of asking each of us what more we can do. And I think it's going to be a powerful message. And hopefully he can be that voice that also said, let's look to what more we can do, because at the end of the day, we're all one humanity.
Just to say that I fully agree. I think that, the Catholic organizations are playing a very significant role in helping the refugees. They are doing in a way, as Pope Francis put it, not in order to do proselytism, but rather to help sincerely the people and facilitate their integration. So they are part of that NGO, civil society, together with private companies and the states and the European Union are working hard to make sure that the first part of the integration take place, and after that will have also an important role to play and so on. And it will help also to avoid this perception that we are in a sort of clash of civilization and so on, but rather to find a way of working together to solve a big challenge that exists for Europe, and to have these people realizing that we can work and cooperate in peace inside the European Union.
Yeah. And if I may say as well, from my experience in Greece, the Greek Orthodox Church has also been instrumental in addressing some of the first challenges of the refugees, but also much more organized. There is a Greek American, a Greek Orthodox Church of America that is doing great work in Syria, in situ, in helping people on the ground there. So I guess in your partnership, the civil society certainly includes some of the religious groups that can help and alleviate the challenges. So thank you so much. We don't want to take more of your time. And thanks to the panelists. Thank you, Antonio, for the presentation. And